October 14, 1943, 30,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany. The sky was a graveyard. Major Robert Morgan, piloting his B-17 Flying Fortress through a storm of flak and German fighters, watched another bomber in his formation explode. That was the third one in 5 minutes. Black smoke trails marked the graves of American crews falling from the sky. 60 B-17s would not return from this mission. 291 young men dead or captured. The mission had a name that would become infamous: Black Thursday. The problem was simple and terrifying. American bombers could reach deep into Germany to destroy factories, refineries, and war production. But they couldn't survive the journey. German fighters swarmed them like wolves, attacking in waves from every angle. The bombers' defensive guns weren't enough. They needed fighter escorts, but no Allied fighter had the range to accompany them all the way to targets deep in Germany and back. The P-38 Lightning ran out of fuel over France. The P-47 Thunderbolt, despite its fearsome firepower, could barely reach the German border with drop tanks. British Spitfires had even less range, so the bombers flew the deepest parts of their missions alone, and they died by the hundreds. American commanders faced an impossible choice: abandon the daylight bombing campaign that was crippling German industry, or continue sending men to their deaths. Then came the aircraft that would change everything. It wasn't even designed to be a bomber escort. The British had rejected it as inadequate. The Americans nearly canceled the program, but through a combination of engineering genius, political maneuvering, and desperate necessity, this fighter would evolve into the war-winning weapon that saved thousands of American bomber crews. This is the story of the P-51 Mustang, the fighter that flew farther, fought harder, and turned the tide of the air war over Europe. Tell us where you're watching from, and let's discover how one aircraft transformed from disappointment to legend. To understand the Mustang's impact, we must first understand the crisis it solved. By autumn 1943, the United States Army Air Forces had committed to a strategy that was killing their own men at an unsustainable rate. The theory was sound: destroy Germany's industrial capacity through precision daylight bombing, cripple their war production, and bring them to their knees without invading. The reality was a nightmare. General Ira Eaker, commanding the 8th Air Force from England, watched his bomber groups launch mission after mission into Germany. Ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt, aircraft plants at Regensburg, oil refineries in the Ruhr. Each mission was supposed to shorten the war. Instead, they were bleeding the bomber force white. The statistics were horrifying. In the week of October 8th to 14th, 1943, a period that would become known as Black Week, the 8th Air Force lost 148 heavy bombers in just 4 major missions. That was 1,180 highly trained aircrew killed, wounded, or captured. At this rate, the entire bomber force would be destroyed within months. Lieutenant Colonel Berne Lay, who flew the Regensburg mission on August 17, 1943, described the experience in his report. Our group was forced to abandon the mission formation and proceed alone to the target. German fighters concentrated on us with unprecedented fury. I watched aircraft fall out of formation, some exploding, others spinning down trailing fire. The sky was filled with parachutes and burning wreckage. We counted 60 German fighters attacking simultaneously. The bomber crews knew the odds. After the Schweinfurt-Regensburg missions, someone calculated that a crew's chance of surviving a 25-mission tour, the requirement to go home, was less than 1 in 4. Some bomber groups lost half their aircraft on single missions. The Luftwaffe had developed tactics specifically to destroy bomber formations. Twin-engine Me-110s and Me-410s, heavily armed with 20mm and 30mm cannon, would attack head-on in formation, their concentrated firepower shredding B-17s and B-24s. Single-engine fighters, Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s, would dart in from every angle, targeting engines and fuel tanks. Major General Frederick Anderson, commanding the 8th Bomber Command, wrote to General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces in October 1943. The current loss rate is unsustainable. Without long-range fighter escort capable of accompanying bombers to any target in Germany, the daylight bombing campaign cannot continue. The escort fighters they had were good, but not good enough. The P-47 Thunderbolt, with its massive radial engine and devastating firepower, was a superb fighter. But even with drop tanks, its combat radius was only about 375 miles. Targets deep in Germany were 500 to 600 miles from England. The P-38 Lightning, with its twin engines and distinctive twin-boom design, had better range. But it suffered mechanical problems in the cold, high-altitude European environment. Its engines overheated, then froze. Its cockpit heaters were inadequate, and German pilots had learned to exploit its weaknesses. British Spitfires were magnificent aircraft, agile and deadly, but designed for short-range interception over Britain. Their range was even shorter than the P-47. The answer to this crisis was already in production, already serving in combat, but performing so poorly that many wanted to scrap the entire program. It was called the Mustang, and in late 1943, it was about to undergo the most dramatic transformation in aviation history. The P-51 Mustang's origin story is one of desperation, speed, and international cooperation born from crisis. In April 1940, as Nazi Germany swept across France and Britain stood alone, the Royal Air Force Purchasing Commission arrived in the United States with a desperate request. Britain needed fighters, thousands of them, and they needed them immediately. Their own aircraft industry was already producing at maximum capacity. The commission approached North American Aviation in Inglewood, California, asking them to build Curtiss P-40 Warhawks under license. The P-40 was a proven design, already in production, and the British needed numbers more than innovation. James Dutch Kindleberger, president of North American Aviation, made a counteroffer that was either brilliant or insane. We can design and build you a better fighter in the same time it would take us to set up P-40 production. The British were skeptical. North American Aviation had never built a fighter aircraft. Designing one from scratch typically took years. Kindleberger promised to have a prototype flying in 120 days. It was desperation that made the British agree. They had nothing to lose. If North American failed, they could always go back to building P-40s. What followed was one of the most remarkable achievements in aviation history. Lead designer Edgar Schmude, a German immigrant and brilliant aerodynamicist, assembled a team that worked around the clock. They incorporated every lesson learned from European air combat, data provided by the RAF, and the latest American engineering. The design that emerged was revolutionary, a laminar flow wing that reduced drag, a streamlined fuselage with the radiator mounted under the fuselage in a duct that actually produced forward thrust through clever thermodynamics, an Allison V1710 liquid-cooled engine mounted low to reduce drag. On October 26, 1940, exactly 102 days after the contract was signed, test pilot Vance Breese took the NA-73X prototype into the air from Mines Field in Los Angeles. It flew beautifully. The British named it Mustang and eagerly awaited production models. The first Mustangs arrived in Britain in October 1941 and entered combat with RAF Squadron 26 in May 1942. Then came the disappointment. The Mustang was fast at low altitude, faster than Spitfires. It was agile, with crisp handling that pilots loved. It had range more than any other fighter the RAF operated. But above 15,000 feet, its performance fell off dramatically. The Allison engine, designed for low-altitude operation, gasped for air in the thin atmosphere where aerial combat occurred. Flight Lieutenant Michael Rawlings of 26 Squadron wrote in his after-action report, "The Mustang is a splendid aircraft for ground attack and low-level reconnaissance, fast, stable, long-legged. But in a high-altitude dogfight with a 109 or 1-90, it's outclassed. The engine simply doesn't have the power where it counts." The RAF relegated Mustangs to tactical reconnaissance and ground attack roles. They were useful, but not the answer to the Luftwaffe's high-altitude fighters. The United States Army Air Forces, observing British experience, showed little interest. They had already committed to the P-38, P-47, and P-40. The Mustang seemed like a dead end, a promising design crippled by an inadequate engine. The aircraft that would save the bomber offensive nearly died in obscurity, relegated to second-line duties. What saved it was the vision of a few individuals who saw potential where others saw failure, and a British engine that would transform everything. The transformation of the Mustang from disappointment to war winner began with a simple question asked by Ronald Harker, a test pilot for Rolls-Royce. In April 1942, Harker was visiting the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Duxford when he spotted a Mustang and asked to fly it. He was immediately impressed by the aircraft's handling, speed at low altitude, and range. But like everyone else, he noted the performance drop-off above 15,000 feet. Then Harker had an idea that would change history. What if they replaced the Allison engine with a Rolls-Royce Merlin, the superb high-altitude engine that powered Spitfires and Hurricanes? The Merlin's two-stage, two-speed supercharger maintained power at altitude. Combined with the Mustang's efficient airframe, the result might be extraordinary. Harker wrote to his superiors, "If this aircraft was fitted with a Merlin engine, it would be a world-beater." Rolls-Royce agreed to experiment. In October 1942, they installed a Merlin 61 engine in a Mustang X, a test aircraft. The first flight exceeded all expectations. The Merlin-powered Mustang was 50 mph faster at altitude than the Allison version. It could reach 40,000 feet. It handled beautifully. And it still had the range that made the original Mustang remarkable. Simultaneously and independently, the United States had reached the same conclusion. The Army Air Forces, desperate for high-altitude performance, authorized Packard Motor Car Company, which was building Merlins under license in the United States, to develop an American version. The result was the P-51B, featuring the Packard WWII-1653, an American-built Merlin engine producing 1,450 horsepower with war emergency power. The transformation was complete. Maximum speed jumped from 390 mph to 440 mph. Service ceiling increased from 31,000 feet to 42,000 feet. Most importantly, the Mustang now had excellent performance at the altitudes where bombers flew and German fighters attacked. Colonel Cass Hauff, who evaluated the P-51B at Wright Field in early 1943, submitted a report that created immediate excitement. This aircraft combines the range of a P-38 with the high-altitude performance of a Spitfire and the ease of maintenance of a P-47. With drop tanks, combat radius exceeds 600 miles. This gives us the capability to escort bombers to any target in Germany. Production was immediately expanded. North American Aviation's plant in Inglewood, California, began producing P-51Bs. A new plant in Dallas, Texas, began producing the identical P-51C. By December 1943, Mustangs were arriving in England. The bomber crews, still reeling from Black Week, heard rumors of a new long-range fighter. Most were skeptical. They had heard promises before. But in November 1943, a few Mustangs appeared, and in December, the 354th Fighter Group, the Pioneer Mustang Group, flew their first escort mission. On December 13, 1943, 16 P-51Bs of the 354th Fighter Group escorted bombers to Kiel, Germany, and back, a 500-mile round trip. All bombers returned safely. The Mustangs engaged German fighters over the target, shooting down 3 and damaging several more. Not a single Mustang was lost. It was a small mission, a tiny preview, but it proved the concept. The fighter that could go all the way had arrived. The true test came in February 1944 during Operation Argument, a coordinated series of massive bombing raids against the German aircraft industry. History would remember it as Big Week. By February 1944, 3 groups were equipped with Mustangs, the 354th, 357th, and 363rd Fighter Groups. They would fly alongside P-38s and P-47s, but for the first time, American fighters could escort bombers all the way to targets deep in Germany. Major General James Doolittle, who had taken command of the 8th Air Force in January 1944, made a crucial tactical change. Previous doctrine had required fighters to stay close to the bombers, flying in rigid formation. Doolittle freed his fighters to pursue German aircraft aggressively. "Your first duty is to destroy German fighters. You can best protect the bombers by clearing the sky of the enemy." The weather in February 1944 had been terrible, grounding the heavy bombers for weeks. Then, on February 19th, forecasters predicted a brief window of clear weather. Doolittle ordered maximum effort. Over 1,000 bombers launched toward targets across Germany, escorted by nearly 800 fighters. It was the largest air battle in history. Captain Don Gentile of the 336th Fighter Squadron, 4th Fighter Group, described the mission. "We escorted B-17s to Leipzig. As we approached the target area, I saw German fighters forming up to attack the bomber stream. We dropped our tanks and went after them. I got on the tail of a Focke-Wulf 190 at 28,000 feet. The Mustang handled perfectly. I fired a 3-second burst from 300 yards. The 190 exploded. I pulled up and found another target, and Me-109. Same result. In 10 minutes, I had shot down 3 German fighters." Over 6 days, from February 20th to 25th, American bombers struck aircraft factories at Leipzig, Brunswick, Regensburg, Augsburg, Stuttgart, and Schweinfurt. The same targets that had cost so dearly in 1943 were now hit repeatedly with far fewer losses. The statistics told the story. During Big Week, the 8th Air Force flew 3,300 bomber sorties and 2,548 fighter sorties. They lost 226 bombers, a significant loss but far below the catastrophic rates of 1943. More importantly, the Luftwaffe lost approximately 450 fighters and, critically, over 250 pilots killed or captured. The Mustang groups led the destruction. The 354th Fighter Group alone claimed 41 German aircraft destroyed in aerial combat during Big Week. The 357th Fighter Group claimed 38. The kill ratios were extraordinary, sometimes 10-1 in favor of the Mustangs. Lieutenant Colonel James Howard of the 354th Fighter Group earned the Medal of Honor for his actions on January 11, 1944, in one of the early Mustang escort missions. Separated from his squadron over Germany, Howard single-handedly attacked a formation of 30 German fighters that were preparing to attack B-17s. For 30 minutes, he engaged the enemy alone, shooting down at least 4 and damaging several others, preventing the Germans from reaching the bombers. When he landed back in England, his Mustang had just 4 rounds of ammunition remaining, but Big Week proved more than just the Mustang's effectiveness in combat. It proved the strategic concept. Long-range fighter escort made daylight precision bombing viable. German industry could be destroyed from the air. The bomber offensive would continue. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, commander of the Luftwaffe fighter forces, recognized the disaster. In his February 1944 report to Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, he wrote, "The appearance of American long-range escort fighters over Germany marks a turning point. Our fighters can no longer attack the bomber formations with impunity. The Americans are now shooting down our fighters in their own airspace, destroying irreplaceable pilots. If this continues, the Luftwaffe fighter force will be destroyed within months." Göring, characteristically, refused to believe it. "It's impossible for single-engine fighters to escort bombers from England to central Germany. You're making excuses for poor performance." Galland's response was bitter. "I wish it were impossible. But I have the combat reports, I have the loss statistics, and I have fewer pilots every day." The bomber crews noticed the difference immediately. Lieutenant Robert Morgan, who had survived Black Thursday, flew his final missions in early 1944 with Mustang Escort. It was like night and day. In 1943, we watched German fighters tear into formations, and there was nothing we could do but shoot and pray. In 1944, we'd see enemy fighters forming up. Then suddenly Mustangs would appear, and the Germans would scatter or die. We started believing we might actually survive our tours. On March 4, 1944, Major General Doolittle made a decision that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. He ordered a maximum effort mission to Berlin, the German capital, 600 miles deep into the Reich. It would be the deepest penetration yet, the longest fighter escort mission ever attempted, and a direct challenge to the Luftwaffe to come up and fight for their own capital. Over 500 bombers launched toward Berlin, escorted by nearly 800 fighters, including 174 P-51 Mustangs. For the first time, American fighters would fly over Berlin in daylight. The symbolism was powerful. Berlin, the heart of Nazi Germany, unreachable by Allied fighters until now, would see American Mustangs in its skies. The psychological impact on German civilians and military would be profound. The mission was costly. Heavy clouds obscured targets, and many bombers were forced to hit secondary objectives. 69 bombers were lost to fighters, flak, and weather. 11 fighters were lost. But the Mustangs shot down 82 German fighters in aerial combat, the highest single-day total of the war. Captain Claiborne Kinnard of the 354th Fighter Group described flying over Berlin. Looking down at the German capital, knowing they couldn't stop us from being there, was an incredible moment. We could see flak bursts, German fighters trying to reach the bombers, and everywhere you looked, Mustangs engaging them. We owned that sky. More Berlin missions followed. March 6th, another maximum effort. March 8th, again. The Luftwaffe rose to defend their capital, and Mustang pilots shot them down in unprecedented numbers. Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group shot down 4 German fighters over Berlin on March 8th, becoming an ace in a single mission. His combat report was clinical. Engaged formation of Me-109s at 27,000 feet. The Mustang's performance advantage at altitude was decisive. I could outturn them, outclimb them, and outrun them. Each engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. The Berlin raids proved conclusively that no target in Germany was beyond reach of American bombers with Mustang escort. The implications were strategic. Every factory, every refinery, every military installation could be attacked in daylight with precision bombing. Reichsmarschall Goering, watching from the ground as American fighters flew over Berlin, reportedly told his staff, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." German pilot morale collapsed. Oberleutnant Heinz Knoke, a Luftwaffe ace with over 30 victories, wrote in his diary after the March Berlin raids, "The Americans come every day now with their heavy bombers and long-range fighters. We scramble to intercept, but before we can reach the bombers, the Mustangs hit us. Today I lost 3 of my squadron in 10 minutes. Good men, experienced pilots, all dead. We cannot win this war in the air. The Americans have too many aircraft, too many pilots, and their Mustangs are simply better than anything we have." By late March 1944, the 8th Air Force had achieved air superiority over Germany. German fighters still rose to intercept, but in decreasing numbers and with decreasing effectiveness. The Mustang groups were destroying German fighters faster than they could be replaced. The transformation from Black Thursday to Berlin in just 5 months was extraordinary. The bomber crews who had faced near-certain death in October 1943 were now completing missions with acceptable losses. The fighter that saved them was the Mustang. Behind the statistics and strategic impact were individual pilots whose skill and courage made the Mustang legendary. Captain Donald Gentile, an Italian-American from Ohio who had initially flown Spitfires with the RAF, transferred to the Mustang-equipped 4th Fighter Group in 1944. He and his wingman, Captain John Godfrey, became one of the most effective teams in the 8th Air Force. Gentile's aggressive tactics and exceptional marksmanship made him famous. By April 1944, he had 21.83 confirmed victories. His technique was simple: Get close, make sure of your target, and fire short, accurate bursts. I never fired from more than 250 yards. At that range, you can't miss and you don't waste ammunition. On March 8, 1944, over Berlin, Gentile shot down 3 German fighters in a single mission. His gun camera footage, shown in newsreels across America, made him a celebrity. The press called him one-man Air Force. But fame had its costs. On April 13, 1944, while performing a low-level victory roll for reporters at his base, Gentile's Mustang clipped the ground and crashed. He survived but was grounded. He had become too valuable for propaganda purposes to risk in combat. He finished the war with 21.83 air victories and 6 ground victories. Major George Preddy of the 352nd Fighter Group became the top Mustang ace of the European theater. Tall, soft-spoken, and devastatingly effective, Preddy shot down 26.83 German aircraft in aerial combat before his death on Christmas Day, 1944. Killed by American anti-aircraft fire during a low-level pursuit of German fighters over Belgium. On August 6, 1944, Preddy achieved the remarkable feat of shooting down 6 German fighters in a single mission over France. His squadron encountered a large formation of Me-109s and FW-190s. In a 15-minute engagement, Preddy methodically destroyed 6 enemy fighters. His wingman confirmed every kill. Preddy's technique emphasized patience and precision. Don't spray bullets everywhere. Get close, line up perfectly, squeeze the trigger and watch them burn. The Mustang gives you the performance to get into position. Your job is to not waste that advantage. Colonel John Meyer, commanding officer of the 352nd Fighter Group, finished the war with 37.5 victories, the 6th highest American ace of the European theater. Meyer was known for aggressive leadership, often leading his group into combat personally. On February 11, 1944, flying one of the early Berlin missions, Meyer's formation encountered over 30 German fighters. Meyer shot down 4 in rapid succession, but then his Mustang took hits from a FW-190 that damaged his engine. Leaking coolant and losing power, Meyer nursed his fighter back to England, landing with the engine seizing. "The Mustang saved my life that day," Meyer later recalled. "Any other fighter would have quit with that damage. The Mustang just kept flying." Lieutenant Urban Drew of the 361st Fighter Group achieved one of the war's most remarkable feats on October 7, 1944. While escorting bombers near Berlin, Drew spotted 2 Me-262 jets, the revolutionary German jet fighters that were 100 mph faster than any propeller-driven aircraft. The jets were landing at their base, vulnerable at low speed with flaps and landing gear extended. Drew dove on them, shooting down both Me-262s in quick succession before German flak drove him away. It was the first time an American pilot had shot down 2 jets in one mission. Captain Chuck Yeager, who would become famous after the war as the first pilot to break the sound barrier, flew Mustangs with the 357th Fighter Group. On October 12, 1944, Yeager shot down 5 German fighters in a single mission, becoming an ace in a day. Yeager's approach was methodical. The Mustang was so good that if you flew it properly, used its strengths, and didn't make mistakes, you could dominate any German fighter. It wasn't magic. It was having the better aircraft and knowing how to use it. But not all stories ended in victory. Major James Howard, who earned the Medal of Honor for his lone stand against 30 German fighters, was shot down on January 20, 1944, and spent the rest of the war as a prisoner. Captain Jack Ilfrey of the 20th Fighter Group was shot down twice, evaded capture both times with help from the French resistance, and returned to combat. His experiences illustrated the dangers even the best pilots faced. These individual stories humanized the statistics. Each victory represented a split-second decision, perfect execution, and often luck. Each loss was a skilled pilot killed or captured, years of training gone in seconds of combat. By June 1944, the 8th Air Force had 14 fighter groups, 9 of them equipped with Mustangs. The 9th Air Force, supporting ground operations, operated additional Mustang groups. total Mustang strength in Europe exceeded 1,000 aircraft. For the D-Day invasion on June 6, 1944, the Allies achieved complete air superiority. Mustangs and other fighters flew continuous patrols over the invasion beaches, preventing German aircraft from interfering with the landings. General Major Joseph "Pips" Priller, commanding JG-26, made one of the few German attacks on D-Day. He and his wingman strafed Sword Beach in the morning, then returned to base. Asked why he didn't continue attacking, Priller replied, "The sky was full of Allied fighters, Spitfires, Thunderbolts, Mustangs everywhere. Continuing the attack would have been suicide." The Luftwaffe flew fewer than 100 sorties over Normandy on D-Day. The Allies flew over 14,000. The contrast illustrated the complete reversal of the air war. As Allied ground forces advanced across France in summer 1944, Mustangs transitioned to ground attack roles alongside escort duties. They strafed German supply columns, attacked locomotives, destroyed vehicles, and supported ground troops. But strategic escort remained crucial. In autumn 1944, the 8th Air Force began targeting German oil production. Synthetic fuel plants at Leuna, Merseburg, and Pohlitz became priority targets. These missions required deep penetration into Germany and drew fierce Luftwaffe resistance. The Luftwaffe, desperate to stop the destruction of oil production, threw everything into defending these targets. Some of the war's largest air battles occurred over oil targets in late 1944. On November 2, 1944, during a raid on Merseburg, over 400 German fighters attacked the bomber formation. The escorting Mustangs engaged in a massive aerial battle. The 8th Air Force lost 40 bombers, but the Mustang groups claimed 134 German fighters destroyed. Captain George Preddy shot down 2 Me-109s during this battle, bringing his total to 25 victories. It was one of his last successes before his death on Christmas Day. The introduction of German jet aircraft, the Me-262 and R-234, in late 1944 posed a new challenge. These jets were 100 mph faster than Mustangs and could attack bombers with impunity if they reached altitude. Mustang pilots developed tactics to counter jets. They couldn't catch them in level flight, but jets were vulnerable during takeoff and landing, and they had limited endurance. P-51 units began to patrol known jet bases, attacking jets as they landed. On March 18, 1945, Lieutenant Walter Gross of the 357th Fighter Group spotted a Me-262 landing at its base near Munich. Gross dove on the jet, which was flying at reduced speed with flaps down. One burst from Gross's .650 caliber machine guns destroyed the jet before it could touch down. These jet-killing tactics were dangerous. German jet bases were heavily defended with anti-aircraft guns, but they were effective. Mustangs destroyed more Me-262s on the ground and during landing than they did in air-to-air combat. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe was a spent force. Fuel shortages grounded most aircraft. Pilot training had collapsed. Experienced pilots were dead or captured. The Mustang group still flew escort missions, but German resistance diminished daily. The Mustang's strategic impact can be measured in statistics that tell a story of industrial dominance. North American Aviation produced 15,586 P-51 Mustangs during the war. At peak production in 1944, they completed one Mustang every hour. The Inglewood plant in California and the Dallas plant in Texas ran 24 hours a day. Each P-51D, the most produced variant, cost approximately $51,000 in 1944 dollars. For comparison, a B-17 bomber cost $238,000. The Mustang was a cost-effective weapon. The production quality was exceptional. These weren't handcrafted prototypes, but mass-produced combat aircraft built to tight tolerances by workers, many of them women, who had never built aircraft before Pearl Harbor. In combat, Mustangs of the 8th Air Force achieved a kill ratio of approximately 7-to-1, 7 German aircraft destroyed for every Mustang lost. Some groups achieved ratios exceeding 10-to-1. Total Mustang victories in the European theater exceeded 4,900 German aircraft destroyed in aerial combat. This represented approximately 17% of all German aircraft lost on the Western Front. But the impact went beyond simple kill ratios. The presence of long-range escort fighters forced the Luftwaffe to engage American fighters instead of bombers. German fighters rose to defend their factories and were shot down before they could attack the bombers. From Big Week in February 1944 through war's end in May 1945, the 8th Air Force's bomber loss rate dropped to approximately 2 to 3% per mission, compared to 10 to 20% for unescorted missions in 1943. This reduction in losses made the bombing campaign sustainable. The economic impact was profound. German industrial production, which had continued increasing through 1943 despite bombing, began to collapse in 1944. Oil production dropped by 90%. Aircraft production fell. Ball-bearing production was crippled. The German war economy staggered under the combined weight of bombing and resource shortages. Albert Speer, German Minister of Armaments and War Production, wrote in his memoirs, "The American introduction of long-range escort fighters in early 1944 marked the beginning of the end for German industry. We could no longer defend our factories effectively. Production continued, but at great cost and with increasing difficulty. The bombing campaign, which had been an annoyance in 1943, became catastrophic in 1944. The human cost of air combat was severe on both sides. The United States lost approximately 27,000 aircrew killed in the European theater. Germany lost over 50,000 aircrew. These were trained personnel, officers, skilled technicians who took years to train. Their loss was irreplaceable. But the mathematics favored America. The United States graduated 30,000 pilots annually by 1944. Germany, by 1944, was graduating fewer than 10,000 per year, with drastically reduced training time. American pilots arrived in combat with 400-plus hours of flight time. German pilots, by 1945, had less than 100 hours. The Mustang enabled this war of attrition by protecting bombers and destroying German fighters. It allowed America to leverage its industrial superiority into military dominance. When the war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945, the P-51 Mustang had achieved what many thought impossible. It had made long-range strategic bombing viable. It had destroyed the Luftwaffe as an effective fighting force, and it had saved thousands of American bomber crew lives. The bomber crews recognized their debt. After the war, veterans of the 8th Air Force credited the Mustang pilots with making their missions survivable. As one B-17 pilot said at a reunion decades later, "We watched Mustangs engage German fighters that would have killed us. Those fighter pilots saved our lives mission after mission. We owe them everything." The strategic impact extended beyond combat results. The Mustang proved that long-range escort was possible, validating the entire daylight precision bombing strategy. Without the Mustang, the Allies would have been forced to abandon daylight bombing or accept catastrophic losses. With the Mustang, they destroyed German industry from the air. Post-war analysis confirmed the Mustang's superiority. In mock combat between captured German fighters and American aircraft, the P-51D proved superior to the FW-190 and Me-109 in virtually every performance category. Only the Me-262 jet could outperform it, and even then, the jet's limited endurance and operational restrictions made it less effective overall. The Mustang served in air forces around the world after WWII. It saw combat in Korea with the U.S. Air Force and with numerous nations into the 1980s, a testament to the soundness of its design. The engineering lessons from the Mustang influenced jet fighter design for decades. The laminar flow wing, the efficient cooling system, the emphasis on range and endurance all became standard considerations for fighter designers. But the human legacy mattered most. The pilots who flew Mustangs remembered the aircraft with deep affection. Chuck Yeager, who went on to break the sound barrier and become America's most famous test pilot, always maintained that the P-51 was the finest fighter of WWII. It did everything well. It was fast, agile, had great range, was easy to maintain, and it was beautiful. Flying a Mustang was pure joy. The bomber crews never forgot. At reunions of the 8th Air Force Veterans Association, bomber crews sought out fighter pilots to thank them. The mutual respect between the bombers and fighters was profound. They had depended on each other for survival. The Mustang's success came at a price. Over 2,500 P-51s were lost in combat in Europe. Each loss represented a pilot killed, captured, or wounded. The casualty rate among fighter pilots was lower than among bomber crews, but still significant. Approximately 15% of 8th Air Force fighter pilots who entered combat were killed, wounded, or captured. For those who flew ground attack missions, the rate was higher. Lieutenant William Cullerton of the 4th Fighter Group described the psychological toll. Every mission, you knew you might not come back. You'd see a friend take off in the morning and watch his aircraft explode over Germany in the afternoon. You'd have drinks with someone at the club, and the next day they'd be gone. You learned not to get too close to people. The stress of combat flying manifested in various ways. Some pilots developed what was called flak happy, combat fatigue from repeated exposure to danger. Others masked their fear with bravado and aggression. A few simply stopped flying, unable to continue. But most kept going, mission after mission, because they understood what was at stake. Every bomber they protected carried 10 men. Every German fighter they shot down was one less threat to those bombers. The mathematics of survival drove them forward. The German pilots they fought against suffered even more. By 1945, Luftwaffe pilot casualties were catastrophic. Young men with minimal training were thrown into combat against experienced American pilots flying superior aircraft. Their life expectancy was measured in missions, sometimes in hours. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, a Luftwaffe ace who survived the war, wrote in his memoir, "By 1945, we were sending boys into combat against the Americans' Mustangs. They had no chance. I watched entire staffels disappear in single missions. The Americans had better aircraft, better training, more fuel, more ammunition, more everything. We had courage and desperation. It wasn't enough." The human cost of the air war was staggering. Approximately 79,000 American and British aircrew were killed in the European air war. German losses exceeded 100,000 aircrew. On the ground, German civilians suffered catastrophically from the bombing that the Mustangs made possible. War's arithmetic is brutal. The Mustang's mission was to enable bombers to destroy German industry and military capacity. This meant attacking cities where factories were located, killing workers who built weapons, destroying transportation that moved supplies. The strategic bombing campaign saved Allied lives by shortening the war. But it extracted a terrible cost from German civilians. These moral complexities haunted some veterans. They had done their duty, fought bravely, and helped win the war. But the destruction they enabled, the lives lost, German and Allied, weighed on them.